She's the shame of our bloodline." My uncle spat loud enough for the entire funeral hall to hear. People pretended not to notice, but I saw their eyes judging, whispering. I was only 7 when I watched my mother's casket lower into the ground, wondering why she'd left me behind. I didn't know yet that she'd been forced into a marriage for the sake of family honor. I didn't know she had once tried to run, and paid the price. And I definitely didn't know that one day I'd be the one to uncover the secret that would bring our entire family's empire to its knees. If this story stirs something in you, don't forget to comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more true stories of karma healing and unexpected justice. My name is Eden Lancaster. I grew up in a house that looked perfect on the outside pillar, polished chandeliers, and sprawling gardens. But behind those grand walls were secrets no light could touch. I was the daughter nobody talked about. My mother Evelyn was the family's black mark, married off to a cousin to keep the bloodline pure, then discarded like a broken ornament once she grew ill from grief. After her death, I was raised by my paternal relatives, distant, cold, and full of whispered warnings, don't ask too many questions. So, I didn't. Not until I turned 27, when a box of old letters arrived at my door. It was postmarked from a rural county I'd never heard of, and inside was a handwritten letter from my mother, dated 2 weeks before her death. That letter didn't just change how I saw my family. It gave me a mission, and it started with one haunting line. "If you ever want to know the truth about us, go to Windmere Valley, your real home." Up next, as Eden journeys to Windmere Valley, long-buried family secrets and a centuries-old betrayal begin to surface. Ready for part 2. Growing up as Eden Lancaster meant knowing your place and staying in it. My earliest memories weren't of bedtime stories or birthday cakes, but of silence. Cold, heavy silence in a house that didn't want me. My father rarely looked me in the eye. My aunts clutched their pearls tighter whenever I walked into the room. I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe I was too loud, too curious, too different. But as I grew older, I started to hear the things they used to whisper when they thought I couldn't understand. Poor girl. A stain, really. She looks just like Evelyn. No wonder Charles left. They should have given her away like they planned. By the time I was 10, I knew what they meant. My mother Evelyn hadn't died of illness like they told me. She'd taken her own life, and the whispers that followed her didn't die with her. They echoed in every hallway behind every shut door. Still, I kept my head down. I got straight A's. I stayed out of trouble. I cleaned up after my cousins called my elders ma'am and sir, and learned to smile with clenched teeth. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I was perfect enough, someone would see me. Maybe I could earn my place. But I was invisible. Worse, unwanted. When I turned 16, I overheard my Uncle Gregory in the study. He was arguing with my grandmother, a woman as sharp as her pearls. We can't just send her off like some stray mother. She is a stray, she said coldly. We kept her out of guilt. Let her be someone else's problem now. That night, I packed a small bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. That plan ended abruptly when the house staff found me sleeping in the greenhouse the next morning. They didn't punish me. They didn't scold me. They didn't say anything at all. They simply left me there until I came back inside on my own,
It was then that I realized they didn't hate me. I wasn't important enough to hate. I was a shadow they tolerated because I carried the last name Lancaster. So I made myself a promise. Someday I'd stop begging for a place at their table. I'd build my own. College was my first taste of air. I got a scholarship barely because my guardians didn't bother filling out most of the paperwork, but I fought my way through it. Worked part-time as a library assistant. Shared a room with 2 other girls in a crumbling apartment near campus. I studied sociology and rural development, drawn to the things that made people feel forgotten, maybe because I knew that feeling so intimately. I graduated with honors, applied to dozens of nonprofit roles, and eventually landed a job at a community center on the edge of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Yet no matter how far I ran from Lancaster Manor, its shadow followed me. It came in the form of rejection letters when people Googled my name and found articles about my family's prestigious estate. It came in backhanded compliments from coworkers who assumed I was some spoiled heiress, slumming it for fun. I never corrected them. I never told them about the way I flinched at the smell of lilacs, because it reminded me of the perfume my grandmother wore when she told me I wasn't welcome at Sunday dinner. I carried all of that, silently, until the day I received my mother's letter. It came in a faded envelope, handwritten in neat cursive I hadn't seen since childhood. The address on the back read, Windmere Valley County Daughters Refuge House. Inside it read, My dearest Eden, if you are reading this, then I've finally found the courage I lacked in life. I'm sorry for the pain they caused you, and for leaving you alone in a house that never knew how to love. But there is something I must show you, something buried far from Lancaster pride and polished lies. Go to Windmere Valley. Find the woman named Mags. Tell her who you are, and ask her about the land. Love, always. Mama, I didn't hesitate. I packed a bag the next morning and took the first bus out of the city. What I didn't know then was that Windmere Valley wasn't just a place. It was a truth. A wound that had been festering under the surface of our family name for generations. And I was about to rip it wide open. Coming up in part 3, Eden arrives in Windmere Valley and unearths a chilling family secret hidden in plain sight. The road to Windmere Valley was long, winding, and nearly forgotten by time. As the bus rolled past rusted barns and broken fences, I felt like I was stepping into a different world, one stripped of the luxury and suffocation of Lancaster marble floors. Here, the sky stretched endlessly, and the only sounds were wind through cornfields and the occasional bark of a farm dog. I clutched my mother's letter the whole ride, reading it over and over, hoping it would give me courage. Find the woman named Mags she'd written. That was all I had. When the bus finally dropped me off in town, if you could call it that, I was the only passenger to get off. No taxis, no phone signal, just a dusty sign that read, Welcome to Windmere Valley, East, 1892. I asked around for Mags. Most folks gave me blank looks. But one elderly woman outside the post office paused, narrowed her eyes, and asked, You Evelyn's girl? Yes, ma'am. She's up at the old refuge house. Keep walking past the orchard. You'll see it. The refuge house turned out to be a worn but lovingly kept cottage, surrounded by overgrown hedges and a crooked wooden gate. On the porch sat a woman in her late 70s with silver hair pulled into a tight braid. She looked up slowly as I approached. Took you long enough, she said, eyes sharp but kind. You've got your mama's fire. Meeting Mags changed everything. She had been a friend of my mother's since they were teenagers, both sent to Windmere to recover after disgracing their families. Mags for being pregnant out of wedlock. My mother for daring to fall in love with someone outside the Lancaster bloodline. That man I would later learn was my real father, a farmer, a kind man who died in a suspicious fire 3 months before I was born. They made her marry Charles to cover it up, Mags said flatly. Lancasters don't like scandals unless they can spin them. I could barely breathe, but what came next hit harder. Mags led me to a locked filing cabinet in the back of her house. Inside were maps, contracts, and a dusty leather-bound ledger marked Lancaster Land Holdings, Windmere Division. I flipped through it and froze. Page after page detailed acquired properties, farms, orchards, wetlands. Signatures forged. Legal loopholes exploited. Families paid pennies or driven off under false tax claims. This is theft, I whispered. It's worse, Mags said. These lands were supposed to be part of a protected trust. Your great-grandfather used his political ties to dissolve it quietly, then funneled the deeds into a dummy corporation, Elmstone Holdings. Guess whose name is on the board now I didn't even have to ask? Gregory Lancaster. The same uncle who called me a stain. The same man who chaired the family foundation, giving speeches about charity and legacy. And now here he was chairman of a shadow company that had stolen over 2,000 acres from working families. I spent the next 3 days poring through every file. The deeper I dug, the more grotesque it became. Photos of demolished homes, receipts of bribes, letters from farmers begging not to be evicted, letters stamped rejected in cold red ink. One letter stopped me cold. It was signed by a woman named May Holloway, dated 1998. She'd refused to sell her land. She'd threatened to go public. Weeks later, her barn mysteriously caught fire. Insurance fraud. Arson. No one ever arrested. May Holloway was my real father's sister. I didn't just have a connection to this land, I had a responsibility. They hadn't just buried my mother. They had buried everyone she ever loved. That night I stood in the center of one of the stolen fields, looking out at the twilight-drenched horizon. The wind carried the scent of sun-warmed earth, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. But breathing wasn't enough. I was going to fight. The twist came the next morning. I was in town printing copies of the documents when I heard someone say the Lancasters are coming. I turned, and there he was. Gregory Lancaster. In a custom-tailored suit, sunglasses on, stepping out of a black SUV like a king surveying his land. Behind him trailed a camera crew and a few PR staffers. They were here filming a documentary on rural investment and family philanthropy. The irony burned. He didn't recognize me at first. Why would he? I was just a shadow in his rear view. But as I stepped forward and said, "Uncle Gregory," his eyes narrowed. "Eden." The fake smile dropped. His face paled. "What are you doing here?" "Uncovering legacies," I said quietly. "Real ones." I confronted him later that afternoon at a town hall meeting. He wasn't expecting anyone to attend. I stood up in the back, voice trembling but clear, and began to speak. I read excerpts from the land ledger. I showed photos of the forged deeds. I named the families who lost everything, while the Lancasters built vacation homes and luxury resorts. And then I did the one thing he couldn't anticipate. I passed out copies of my mother's letter printed with her signature. "I am Eden Evelyn Holloway," I said to the stunned room. And this land was stolen. From her. From me. From all of you. The room erupted. Some people gasped, some cried. Others shouted in anger. Gregory stormed out before the meeting ended. But it was too late. The truth was out. In part 4. The fallout begins. Eden's confrontation sends shockwaves through the community, and the Lancaster dynasty starts to crumble. I didn't sleep that night. The town hall had ended in chaos, shouts, accusations, a stunned silence, as people took home their copies of the Lancaster documents. I watched as decades of secrets finally cracked open in a single room, but victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like waiting for a storm to hit. And it did. By morning, my face was all over the news. Eden Lancaster accuses family of land fraud. Black sheep or whistleblower scandal in the valley. The fall of Lancaster legacy. The local radio station was playing my mother's voice on a loop. Audio taken from an old oral history Mags had recorded years ago. Hearing her speak, hearing her laugh, it was the first time I had felt her close since I was 7. But that peace lasted about 10 minutes. A black SUV pulled up to the refuge house just before noon. Out stepped Gregory. This time, he wasn't smiling. He didn't knock. He barged in, like he still owned the world. "You've made your point, Eden," he said, voice like gravel. "Now shut it down." "No," I replied simply. "You think you're going to destroy me with a few dusty papers? You think the town cares about some hillbilly farms? They care," I said. "You should have seen their faces." He stepped closer, eyes dark. "You are nothing. You were a pity project. An embarrassment we didn't send away because your mother guilt-tripped us into keeping you around. Do you really think people like you win, Eden?" I flinched. Not at his words, I'd heard worse, but at the certainty in them, because a part of me still believed him. For most of my life I had felt like nothing, like furniture in someone else's mansion. Even as I stood there with proof in my hands, even as I watched the community start to rally, deep down I was terrified that I was still that abandoned girl in the greenhouse waiting for someone to find her. He saw that crack, and he pushed. "If you don't shut this down," he growled, "you'll regret it. We still have lawyers, Eden. We still have judges. And we still know how to make people disappear, just like we did with your father." I froze. "What did you say?" He paused just long enough for the truth to settle. "Your mother thought he died in a fire," he said, with a twisted smirk, "but he didn't." Not right away. He turned to leave, but not before dropping the final blow. Sometimes things burn slow, like reputations, like daughters who forget their place. That was it. The moment everything shattered. I collapsed onto the couch after he left my whole body shaking, not with fear, but with rage. A rage that had waited years to be acknowledged. A fire I had tried to keep small for the sake of survival. They didn't just steal land. They stole lives. They murdered my father. They drove my mother to suicide. And now, they wanted me silent too. I stood up, tore the curtains open, and let the light in. For the next 48 hours, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I worked. I uploaded every file I had to a secure drive. I created a public archive complete with audio logs, scanned ledgers, and testimony from local farmers Mags had helped gather over the years. I submitted the documents to the State Attorney General's office, the Department of Land Management, and 3 investigative journalists. And I recorded a video. It was just me in the orchard holding my mother's letter. "I am not the shame of my bloodline," I said, staring directly into the lens. "I am the result of its silence, and I will not carry its sins." The video went viral in under a day. Comments flooded in from across the country. Farmers from neighboring towns shared similar stories. Descendants of other victims came forward. But it wasn't just the public who reacted. It was my family. A formal cease and desist letter came first, delivered by courier wrapped in gold and embossed stationery. Then came the threats. Online. Anonymous emails. Cryptic texts. I knew who they came from. Not directly, of course. The Lancasters didn't get their hands dirty. They paid others to do it. But the worst blow came when I got a call from my job in the city. "Eden, we're sorry. We've been contacted by a legal team. They're claiming you breached confidentiality by distributing stolen corporate documents. We're going to have to suspend you pending investigation." I sat on the porch for hours after that call, the sky above me turning from orange to black. They were coming for everything. They were trying to erase me again. And for a terrifying moment, I wanted to let them. What if they succeeded? What if I just handed them the perfect reason to crush me? I thought about packing up and disappearing, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. But then I looked down at the soil beneath my feet. This was my land. My mother's land. My father's dream. My family's truth. And they weren't going to bury me in it like they did everyone else. That night I went to the town square, where locals had gathered for a spontaneous candlelight vigil. Someone had printed photos of the stolen farms and pasted them on boards. Others had brought signs, "Justice for Windmere." We are not disposable. Thank you, Eden. I didn't plan to speak, but the mayor called me up. I stood before 100 faces, lit by candlelight. And I told them everything, not just about the land, but about the house with chandeliers and silence, about the girl who had to teach herself how to be seen, about the voice of a mother that still echoed through time, and about the fire inside me that for the first time felt like power, not punishment. They stood with me. For the first time, I was the one people listened to. In Part 5, with her pain, now a weapon of purpose, Eden makes the choice that will either set everything right or risk losing it all. After the vigil, I didn't go back to the refuge house. I needed space, silence, somewhere to breathe without fire or applause. So I walked, past the old barn, past the cemetery where 3 generations of farmers rested beneath crooked stones, all the way to the edge of the valley, where the land met the river, and the stars could finally be seen without the filter of city lights or Lancaster expectations. I sat in the tall grass, scrolled my knees to my chest and cried, not just from exhaustion, but from clarity. For so long, I had believed I needed to win to prove I belonged. Now, for the first time, I realized I didn't have to prove anything. I was never supposed to inherit the Lancaster throne. That wasn't my failure. That was their curse. What I had was something they'd never understand. Roots, purpose, freedom. But that didn't mean I wasn't scared, because what came next wasn't about secrets. It was about what I would do with the truth, and whether I was strong enough to stand by it when the spotlight faded. I closed my eyes and let the wind answer for me. The next morning, I found Mags sitting on the back porch, sipping black coffee out of a chipped mug. She didn't say a word when I sat beside her. After a long silence, she finally asked, "What scares you the most right now?" I thought about it. "Not knowing if I'm doing the right thing," I said quietly. "What if this just ends with me burned out and empty fighting a war that doesn't change anything?" Mags chuckled. "Honey, if you wait for certainty before doing the right thing, you'll be buried next to it." She sipped again. "I knew your mama before she was forced into silence. She had fire like you. But fire, left alone, it consumes. Fire, shared," she smiled. "It warms. It builds." I looked at her heart, heavy with questions, and asked the one I had buried the deepest, "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Mags didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the shed, and returned with a folded cloth. Inside was a pendant I recognized instantly. It had hung on my mother's neck every day of her life. "She left this for you," Mags said. "Told me not to give it until you stopped trying to be her and started becoming you." My hands trembled as I fastened it around my neck. It wasn't just jewelry. It was permission. Later that day, I stood before the local council. This time, not to accuse, but to propose. "I'm not here to just burn the Lancaster name to the ground," I said. "I'm here to build something better in its place." I submitted a petition to convert a portion of the reclaimed land into a community-run trust, a model where displaced families could return, where locals could farm and live without fear of being pushed off. But more than that, I made a promise to open a care home for elders, for widows, for people like Mags and Evelyn, women written out of the story. I already had the land, and the legal storm Gregory had threatened. It was losing steam fast. Multiple officials had launched investigations into Lancaster holdings. 2 board members had resigned. Public sympathy was overwhelmingly on my side. I was no longer just the black sheep. I was the spotlight. And I had no intention of stepping away from it. That night, I returned to the refuge house one last time. I sat at my mother's old desk, opened a fresh notebook, and began to write any plans, sketches, letters to foundations that might help fund the care home. It felt less like rebuilding and more like remembering. Remembering who I'd been before the whispers, before the marble halls, before shame. I was never the shame of the bloodline. I was the proof it could heal. And this time I wasn't waiting for permission. Coming up in Part 6, Eden puts her plans into action and faces the consequences of truth with unwavering resolve. Eden. Lancaster didn't just expose the truth, she rewrote the story. Within weeks of her public petition, the county board voted to freeze all remaining Lancaster land holdings pending investigation. The once invincible empire began to unravel thread by golden thread. Gregory Lancaster was subpoenaed. Multiple lawsuits followed. Reporters camped outside the family estate, hounding for comment, and for the first time in a century, the Lancasters weren't behind the camera. They were on trial. One by one, the families pushed off their land were contacted and offered restitution. The community trust was approved by a narrow but powerful majority, backed by letters from citizens' historians and even former Lancaster employees who came forward with their own stories of abuse and silencing. And Eden, she broke ground on the care home. On the same field her mother once walked through as a girl, now free, now hers. At the dedication ceremony, the crowd stood in silence as Eden stepped up to the podium. Her voice didn't tremble. "My name is Eden Evelyn Holloway," she declared. "And I am not a mistake. I am not a secret. I am what grows when truth is finally given sunlight." The applause was thunderous. Even the mayor cried. But the best moment, watching Gregory escorted from the courthouse in handcuffs, and watching the same local reporters who once called Eden the black sheep now calling her the face of restoration. In the final part, Eden's journey comes full circle, with a lasting message of healing legacy and light. These days, Eden doesn't live in anyone's shadow. She lives in Windmere Valley, her true home, surrounded by fields that now belong to the people who tend them. The community care home stands tall at the edge of the orchard, its halls echoing not with silence, but with laughter music and stories finally allowed to be told. Eden no longer seeks approval from those who once called her the stain. She doesn't need to, because she knows now the truth doesn't need permission to matter. She found her strength, not in revenge, but in rebuilding, in reclaiming what was stolen and planting something better in its place. Her story is proof that legacy isn't about bloodlines or last names. It's about what you choose to stand for when no one else will. And sometimes the loudest redemption is living well. If Eden's journey moved, you take a moment to share or comment below. Or better yet, share your story. Because healing starts when we speak the truth and choose to write a new ending.